Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Drama from start to finish in Qatar today. What was Perez doing for the pit lane during the sprint race? But how exactly did Red Bull go from having a car that was nowhere at the start of the day? Verstappen was behind Hülkenberg for the entirety of the sprint to being able to secure pole position after some setup changes later in the day. But it might not as yet be guaranteed. George Russell is not happy about what he believes was probably impeding. The stewards have summoned Verstappen. What is their conclusion going to be? Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. First of all, Colapinto not had the greatest last couple of weekends in Formula 1. Apparently he's spotted speaking to Flavio Briatore, of course, from Alpine. There's been a rumour that Jack Doohan might be in trouble, but I'm not going to lie, Colapinto's not made an especially strong case. If you looked at, let's say, the last 3-4 rounds in isolation, it was when he first came in that he made the biggest impression. Hamilton had some interesting comments today and yesterday about his performance, really, because he's been off Russell all weekends. He is running a different setup. I think this is worth noting that there are differences, and we know that Mercedes will be experimenting, and if they're going to experiment anywhere, it is going to be with Hamilton's car. But also Hamilton has been, I think he's pretty demotivated right now, and I can understand it. Even Verstappen in the press conference said that it's not like Hamilton's lost it. It's more that he's, when the car isn't that good, he's not that motivated, especially when the season is where it is. I think we've seen this with Hamilton in the past. Like, if he's not in a championship fight, he just kind of checks out a bit. And of course, he had a good last weekend in Vegas, making the comeback drive. But he made some, harsh comments on himself after sprint quali, saying, I'm not as fast as I used to be. I'm just slow. Same thing every weekend. And again, the Merc is pretty quick, but it's not exactly the same Merc. They are running some differences. It might have been major, and obviously Hamilton's struggling with some confidence in the car at the moment, even if it's pretty good. However, had a great start in this race, overtakes Verstappen off the line. This was Russell eventually getting passed by Piastri after just a couple of corners. So the sprint got underway. Of course, a big deal this sprint for the Constructors' Championship. McLaren were in a good position to score some serious points over Ferrari, and it's funny how it works, right? Lando Norris has bottled race starts to Max Verstappen all season, and to basically anyone that he's been driving against on the front row. And all of a sudden, as soon as the championship is lost, Lando nails the start. He's away and gone, no problems at all. And he would have won this race, I think, by miles, had McLaren not played a very strategic team game. Now, I do wonder, I'm not going to lie, because obviously in Brazil, they also played a masterclass in the sprint, and then the main Grand Prix was a disaster. Now, it's not going to rain in Qatar, so that obviously changes the potential outcomes, but I do think it's possible that Ferrari could be able to capitalise. Again, their qualifying is just not where, not being where they need it to be. This was the start. Verstappen got bogged down off the line. Eventually, Hülkenberg even gets past him, which was incredibly remarkable that he couldn't get back past. And Sergio Perez, this was the first real drama of the day, started from the pit lane after some setup changes. So, of course, they knew that Perez, after another terrible sprint quali, was out of contention for points. They decided, all right, let's experiment. We'll run some setup changes. And to be fair, whatever they ran on Perez's car arguably helps them later in the day to, give Verstappen a car capable of putting on pole position, which was, kind of out of nowhere, really. But Perez is officially going to be 8th in this year's championship based on the standings now, which is honestly quite impressive. And this was also quite impressive. So, okay, I don't know what's going through Checo's head here. I've never seen this happen before, ever. But of course, Perez was starting from the pit lane here. And the safety car, it's funny because the safety car's already gone through, because they were expecting the green, the light goes green in the pit lane after the cars have come off the grid. Perez is allowed to go from the pit lane after the setup change on the Parc Ferme. And he just doesn't go. In fact, he's not even on full throttle for any of this run. So I can only presume that his intention was just to do some test driving at the back of the field, but also he had clear track in front of him. There was no reason why he had to let Colapinto go to make this happen, right? So Colapinto sees him just at a standstill. I've never seen anything like this. At a standstill with the green light on, and Colapinto's like, well, I guess I'll just drive around him. Eventually, Perez does pull off the line, but yeah, it's too late for him, and Colapinto overtakes past him and takes 19th position in the race. So what was that all about? So confusing. And even Horner, I mean, look at Horner's face here, trying to, diagnose why Perez did what he did. He says, I don't know, to be honest. I'll need to have a chat with him about it. It looks like he just misjudged it, but when the lights go out, you're supposed to go, he says. So that's pretty straightforward, I think. And then Checo said, the main objective of today was to be as far back as possible, to have as much clean air as possible. That was the objective. But, you know, he could have just stayed ahead of Franco. You'd have thought that would have been no issue. I think we managed to understand the car with the changes we've done. There's room to improve. And he also said, like, the intention was absolutely to let Colapinto through on purpose. But, yeah, do you believe it? I don't know. Did Checo have another brain fart? I'm a little bit confused. But it's like, why is it always Perez? You know, not only does he qualify bad in qualifying for the sprint, and therefore he has to take the experimental setup, and therefore he doesn't even pull off the line in time. Like, you know, there are things happening in that side of the Red Bull garage that we have frankly never seen before. And the funny part was as well that at this point we had Max Verstappen, who wasn't having a great sprint at all, and we had the 4 contenders for the Red Bull seat, which is funny to think about because Lawson, Tsunoda, Colapinto and Perez were all having a bit of a burger off at the back of the field. And yeah, I don't know who's going to get the drive. It's probably going to be one of these guys. Unless they decide to bring Danny Rick out of retirement or something like that, I don't know. But yeah, it's not a great look for the Red Bull situation right now, and it's not like the RB is particularly good around here. So as the lap goes on, you can see that Lando's already pulled a massive gap here, right? It looks like, okay, yeah, Piastri got through on Russell, but arguably Russell had the fastest race car in the sprint, and he was trying to get past Oscar basically the whole race. Qatar is a fun circuit to watch in qualifying. I mean, it's so fun to drive on the F1 games and stuff because it's just so fast. The corners are insane. Of course, it's a motorbike track, really. So it makes sense why the corners are designed in the way that they are. It's fun to watch from qualifying POV. The racing just isn't great. The racing can be okay if there's a massive tyre delta. The DRS zone is arguably not long enough. There are so many fast corners, it's very challenging to follow, certainly with these new cars. And also, I think the main problem with this track is that it's so flat, and every corner looks kind of like the same. Like, I see this corner and I'm not exactly sure where it is. Like, this could be at the end of the lap as you go through the fast triple right-handers. I think that's where this is, but I could be wrong. It might be earlier in the lap, around about turn 6, turn 7. And on basically every track, I'd be able to tell you at a glance exactly where they are. Qatar, it's just difficult to say because of lack of landmarks, and every corner kind of looks the same. I don't know if you guys agree. Maybe I'm just, you know, not clued up enough on this track. But it was looking great here for McLaren, right? I mean, if they won to the sprint and they won to the race, they win the Constructors. But and it's a tall order now for Ferrari to overturn the deficit they have, but it's still possible as it stands. But McLaren, they had nailed it again. They had the 1-2, and then their plan was just to keep Russell behind. This was incredible, though, that Verstappen dropped down to 9th place at the start of the race. He had so much understeer, I think it was oversteer actually, so much oversteer in the car, had no temp in the tyres, couldn't get any grip at all, and you know, Verstappen was just fuming at it before, but he was like, what is this tractor that you're making me drive? He made an overtake on Gasly, and that was it. He stayed behind Hülkenberg for the entirety of the rest of the race. It's, you know, incredible really how we're seeing a Red Bull that still can be good when they get it just right, but they rarely get it just right anymore. A Red Bull that was unfathomably good at the start of the season to a Red Bull stuck behind a Haas for the entirety of a sprint. And sure, shout out Haas, shout out Nico Hülkenberg, but nonetheless, it's incredible to think about. The Red Bull have sometimes they get it just so wrong, and it wasn't long ago that Helmut Marko was saying, oh well, Max would put it on pole in a Haas or put it on pole sometimes in an AlphaTauri. And, you know, now he's stuck behind a Haas for the entire race. So, you know, Max is unbelievable. Best drive on the grid as far as I'm concerned. But there are many other great Formula 1 drivers out there. Right? It's not like Max can perform miracles in the cars that he's been given. Now, this was the battle of the race in the day, really, by a mile, was Leclerc versus Hamilton. I'm very much looking forward to seeing these two at Ferrari together next year because they're real clean, hard races. Hamilton and Leclerc very much pushed the limit of what was possible here. They were riding each other just to the edges of the track, but giving each other enough racing room. It was a really, really great battle through a couple of corners. Leclerc eventually gets the move done, and yeah, this was just fantastic to watch. Basically the only thing that happened in the sprint, to be fair, until the final corner when Norris was basically backing himself up the whole time to give Piastri a tow and give him DRS to make sure that Russell couldn't overtake, and that was critical to ensuring that McLaren eventually scored the 1-2. The remarkable thing, of course, at the end of the race was that then Lando yielded the win. I couldn't believe this when I saw it. And look, I'm going to give Lando the benefit of the doubt on this one just because the drivers is now over. And if you guys are aware of what happened in Brazil, then Piastri surrendered the lead, right? He gave Norris the win there for the, the Drivers' Championship points. That's no longer relevant, and therefore Norris wanted to return the favour. His team actually told him, no, it's too risky. Let's not bother with that. It's, too much of a concern for us, basically. But he executed it well. He yielded the win. Piastri takes the sprint win. Norris takes second. Russell takes third. And no, I guess it was a nice thing to do. Does Max ever do this? Like, would you ever see Max doing this? No, not in my opinion. And maybe it's okay because I'm just trying to think of like other champions, great champions, and think, would they do a similar thing in a similar position when the drivers is over, the constructors doesn't matter anyway because it's 1-2 either way. I think, you would get guys like Hamilton doing this. You would get other great champions doing this. So, because it's a sprint. I think in a race, it's a different story. In a sprint, I think, I'll say, fair play, Lando. I think that was all right. But Max wouldn't do it. I guess is my conclusion really there. But it was a big result for McLaren because plus 15 for them, plus 9 for Ferrari and for Mercedes. And Max scored a singular point. And of course, Checo scored a fat 0. Lando says, the team told me not to bother, but I did it anyway. I made my mind up in Brazil when it happened. Presumably, if he didn't win the championship, then he would do this. And that's exactly what he did. Now, Russell wasn't happy, and I can understand why. He wasn't happy in most of the sessions, really, because he was close to getting pole or winning this race. And he says, look, a lot of pace in hands, but they drove well as a team. Now, it's an interesting perspective here from Russell, because basically Lando was backing himself up to give Piastri the DRS, and therefore he could keep Russell behind. Now, that's good strategic play, and Russell's like, oh, well, fans don't want to see that. It's 2 against 1. It's team orders. It's kind of, he doesn't quite go as far to say it's unfair, but he basically says, yeah, like I would have passed Piastri if Lando went off. Maybe I'd have got him as well. But it's like, that's exactly the reason why McLaren played it as they did. And Max, after the sprint, of course, on some level, does he really care anymore? He's the world champion. They're not winning the constructors. But he says there was no balance on entry, no balance mid-corner. I couldn't even catch Hulkenberg. That says enough for us. It's very bad this weekend so far. So what exactly changed between then and shortly afterwards? And, Hamilton says he actually talked about things afterwards and basically said, like, I'm just looking forward to the winter break at this point. I just want to get through these next couple of races. So, yeah, Hamilton gets like this often at these types of seasons when things aren't going so well. I think next season he's going to be very motivated at Ferrari. But if he starts next season at Ferrari and his quali pace isn't there, that's, I think, a time for serious concern from the Hamilton camp. But let's talk about qualifying because there was more drama afoot. This was Q1. Again, the Mercedes was looking pretty good, certainly in Russell's hands. Hamilton was always a few tenths off where he needed to be if he wanted to be, right at the top. And, let's not forget, he put in like an unbelievable pole lap around this track back in 2021. Like, yeah, the Mercedes was great, but like Bottas was also excellent at qualifying in the Mercedes, and like Hamilton's, if you guys haven't watched Hamilton's 2021 pole lap around here or that qualifying session, I think he dunked like 6 tenths on the field or something. Like, it's not like he can't drive this track. Just for whatever reason in this year's Mercedes, he's struggling against Russell around these type of circuits, right? But anyway, Russell does a great job, but Verstappen immediately was in the mix. And the funny thing is that for me, the litmus test of where Red Bull are or where Verstappen could be is not where Verstappen is. It's actually where Perez is. Like, if Perez isn't getting knocked out in Q1 or Q2, you know that Red Bull have a decent car, which is kind of ridiculous to say, but, not gonna lie, it's actually kind of true. And fair play to Zhou and Bottas as well in the Sauber. They've obviously made some progress with their car over the last couple of rounds, but yeah, Q1, Alonso was looking good for a time. Even Stroll put in a decent lap as well. But the track improvement was ramping up substantially, and it was both Williams, Ocon, who's again had a torrid time in the Alpine lately compared to Gasly, and then Hulkenberg. I think Hulkenberg, they were talking about Haas, that he scored 2 points earlier in the day for Haas, massive in the constructors, but they messed up basically the power allocation, the energy store, how they deploy it, and that screwed up Hulkenberg. Lawson missed out though, and he maybe in part missed out because he ran into Stroll. The funny thing was, but basically the guy in front of him slowed down a lot through turns 9, turns 10, and it kind of affected Lawson's lap. He thought it was Alonso. Let's not forget they were beefing it back at the US Grand Prix in Austin. That's probably why Lawson thought that Alonso did it, but actually it was Stroll. So yeah, it seems like Alonso's was living rent-free, which I thought was pretty funny, because the implication there is that Lawson thought that Alonso was purposely doing this to spite him, which, to be fair, is something Alonso would do. But it actually wasn't him. It was just Stroll dawdling around the track, it seems. So I thought that was kind of funny, and honestly, kind of a big deal, because Yuki just squeaked into Q2, which is potentially kind of big for Verstappen's teammates next year, basically. But immediately Verstappen was on it, and it was quite clear that it was going to be Max, Russell, or Norris. Basically, those were the only three contenders to get pole in this session, the way that it was going. The Ferraris, it's a classic Ferrari situation, really. They look good at times, and then when it comes down to qualifying, they're just missing a couple of tenths, certainly in these high-speed corners, which isn't necessarily meant to favour them all that well. But then we saw, I think, in the second qualifying session, Perez was off in the gravel, so he had a good Q1. I think he was only like 3 tenths off Max, which is like, oh my god, Perez 3 tenths off Max? Like, he's back, right? But no, he ain't back. And he obviously was struggling a little bit for the rest of the session, but he did make it through just squeaked in to Q3 in the end. He had a lap time about here, but lots of people behind were improving. Fair play to Zhou. Like, honestly, he's stepped up the last couple of weekends. He's not done enough to keep his drive, but he has done well. I mean, a 1:21.5 here was honestly very, very competitive. It was good enough for P11 at the time. And then Verstappen put in a storming lap here to go 3 tenths clear of anybody. But obviously that was right at the end of the session where the times were their absolute fastest in the cooler conditions. And Max's pole time today was, I believe, 3 seconds quicker, something in that ballpark, than his pole time was last year. Like, it's actually insane how much track improvement we've seen from the different conditions this year compared to last. This was early in Q3. Again, it was pretty much Russell and Verstappen setting the pace, but right at the death, Verstappen pulls out a banger lap, goes half a tenth faster than Russell on his final lap, and secures a Verstappen, Russell, Norris 1-2-3. Piastri put in a decent lap as well. Leclerc was in 5th, Hamilton in 6th. Sainz couldn't improve that much. Perez got 9th, basically a second off Max. So, you know, but when Max is the fastest man on track, that was good enough for 9th today. Could you believe it? This, though, was a pretty big point of drama, though, right? So Russell on his slow lap comes across Verstappen. Now, to be fair, Russell was absolutely bombing it. I mean, you guys can see it right here. I can't play it in full speed or Sky Sports will come for me. But he's sending it on. This is a out lap, like a slow lap, basically. And Russell's trying to get track position here ahead of Max. And Max decides, I ain't allowing that. So Russell comes bombing it round the corner here. He's not on a fast lap, so that's the key point, because if he was on a fast lap, this is slam dunk impeding, no questions at all, from Max Verstappen. Russell then has to take evasive action. He has to slow down, squeeze out, and then eventually says on the radio, that was super dangerous by Verstappen. But look, obviously it's an interesting one, because it's pretty rare you see a driver bombing it that fast on a lap that isn't a fast lap, and Verstappen was, you know, you could argue within his rights to say, look, this is my position, this is where I'm going to be, I don't necessarily have to get out of the way. But it's definitely interesting, because Max says, I knew that everyone was on a slow lap, not on a push lap. I think George got excited, he wanted to pass and get around. George says, I was just following my delta, and Max is like, just drive straight through. So, a little confusing, and actually, as of, you know, shortly before recording this, Max has been summoned to the stewards over this for allegedly driving unnecessarily slowly. So, it's going to be interesting, right? Because if Max, when he was driving in those series of corners, was significantly slower than the expected delta time, then I guess, you know, Mercedes could make the case that, yeah, Max drove slower than he needed to in order to stop Russell trying to make the move that he was trying to make. But obviously Russell was also going a lot faster. So it's a very interesting one. The most likely outcome here is probably nothing happens, right? But Russell's on the radio saying that Max has been super dangerous. Max is saying there's nothing in it, what are you talking about? And I'm sure Jonathan Wheatley, before he departs Red Bull, is going to be off to the stewards room to more than likely win the case, because that's usually what they do. But this is going to be your grid for tomorrow's Grand Prix, and yeah, it's a banger, right? This is why I like this new format. I think it's a bit strange that the sprint is earlier in the day, quali is next, because I've kind of forgotten about the sprint by the time that quali comes around, but it does allow the teams to make changes between the sprint and qualifying, which means that we get interesting outcomes like this, where the Red Bull all of a sudden is looking very good. In the race, however, I'm not expecting Max to just drive off into the distance. I think it's going to be very competitive. And look, Russell will want to win back-to-back. The McLarens, though, they're in a nice position to basically sew up the Constructors' title. So hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.